In the shadowy corridors of Buckingham Palace, where whispered secrets carry more weight than official proclamations, a single moment would change everything. For 37 years, Senior Royal Protection Officer Marcus Wellington had served the crown with unwavering dedication. His weathered hands had guided 3 generations of royals through countless dangers. His sharp eyes had spotted threats that others missed, and his steady presence had been the invisible shield protecting the most powerful family in Britain. But on that fog-laden morning in November, as autumn leaves danced outside the palace windows, Marcus would face a choice that would test every principle he held sacred. The warning he was about to deliver would not be about an external threat or a security breach. Instead, it would expose a conspiracy so deep within the royal household that it threatened to shake the very foundations of the monarchy itself. What Marcus discovered in the early hours of that Tuesday morning was more than just evidence of betrayal. It was proof of a calculated plan that had been years in the making. The perpetrator wasn't a foreign agent or a crazed fan. It was someone who had shared tea with the Queen, someone who had access to the most private family moments, someone who had been trusted with secrets that could topple governments. As Marcus stood in the Queen's private study, holding the evidence that would change everything, he knew that his next words would either save the crown or destroy his own life forever. The loyal guard who had never questioned an order was about to give the most important warning of his career, and the outcome would surprise everyone, including himself. This is the true story of how one man's unwavering loyalty led to the most shocking revelation in modern royal history, and why his final warning became the catalyst for events that the palace still refuses to acknowledge publicly. Marcus Wellington had always believed that loyalty was measured not in words, but in the quiet moments when no one was watching. At 62 years old, his silver hair perfectly combed and his uniform pressed to perfection, he embodied everything the Royal Protection Service stood for. His colleagues often joked that Marcus bled royal blue, but there was truth beneath their humor. For 37 years, he had dedicated his life to protecting the crown, and, in return, the royal family had become more than his duty. They had become his purpose. The morning of November 15th began like any other. Marcus arrived at Buckingham Palace at precisely 5:30, as he had every weekday for nearly 4 decades. The security checkpoint guards nodded respectfully as he passed through the staff entrance, their faces familiar after years of shared early mornings. The palace corridors were empty at this hour, save for the occasional cleaner pushing a cart loaded with fresh linens and polishing supplies. Marcus preferred these quiet moments before the chaos of the royal schedule began. In the silence, he could walk the halls he knew better than his own home, and mentally prepare for whatever challenges the day might bring. His routine was methodical and unchanging. First, he would review the overnight security reports in his small office adjacent to the Queen's private apartments. Then, he would conduct his morning inspection of the royal quarters, checking for anything that seemed out of place or unusual. It was during this inspection that he had prevented 3 potential security breaches over the years: a suspicious package left by a window cleaner, a maintenance worker who couldn't provide proper identification, and a photographer who had somehow gained access to restricted areas during a state visit. On this particular morning, as Marcus made his way toward the Queen's private study to ensure everything was secure for her 8 o'clock briefing with the private secretary, he noticed something that made him pause. The door to Lady Catherine Pemberton's office was slightly ajar, and a soft light glowed from within. Lady Catherine served as the Queen's senior lady-in-waiting, a position of enormous trust and responsibility. She had held this role for 15 years, managing everything from the Queen's personal correspondence to her private social calendar. More importantly, she was one of the few people outside the immediate family who had access to the Queen's most private spaces. Marcus found it odd that Lady Catherine would be in her office so early. Her schedule typically began at 8:30, after the Queen's morning briefing. He approached the door quietly, his years of training making his footsteps silent on the thick carpet. As he drew closer, he could hear the soft clicking of computer keys and what sounded like papers being shuffled. Perhaps she was catching up on correspondence or preparing for an important meeting, but something about the furtive nature of her movements made Marcus uneasy. He positioned himself where he could observe without being seen. Through the partially open door, he watched as Lady Catherine worked at her desk, but her actions seemed strange and hurried. She was photographing documents with a small camera, the type that intelligence services used for covert operations. Each document was carefully positioned under a small lamp, photographed from multiple angles, and then returned to what appeared to be a stack of official papers. Marcus felt his blood run cold as he recognized some of the documents she was photographing. They bore the distinctive red classification stamps that indicated they were part of the Queen's private intelligence briefings, documents that contained sensitive information about government operations, foreign diplomatic communications, and security assessments. These papers were supposed to be returned to the Cabinet Office immediately after the Queen's briefings. No copies were permitted, and certainly no unauthorized photography was allowed. Lady Catherine worked with practiced efficiency, suggesting this was not the first time she had engaged in this activity. She seemed to know exactly which documents to prioritize, focusing on those with the highest security classifications. As Marcus watched, frozen in disbelief, she photographed correspondence between the Queen and the Prime Minister discussing sensitive matters of national security. She captured images of briefing notes about ongoing intelligence operations and diplomatic strategies that could severely damage Britain's international relationships if they fell into the wrong hands. The gravity of what he was witnessing began to sink in. Lady Catherine Pemberton, a woman who had shared intimate family moments with the royal family, who had been trusted with the Queen's most personal secrets, was systematically stealing classified information. The betrayal was so profound that Marcus struggled to process it fully. This wasn't just a security breach, it was treason at the highest levels of the royal household. Marcus remained perfectly still, using his training to control his breathing and keep his presence concealed. He needed to see more, to understand the full scope of what Lady Catherine was doing. Over the next 20 minutes, he watched as she photographed dozens of documents, each one containing information that could be devastating in the wrong hands. She worked with a calm professionalism that suggested she had been doing this for months, perhaps years. When Lady Catherine finally finished her work, she carefully returned all the documents to their proper order and placed them in a secure folder marked for return to the Cabinet Office. She then retrieved a small electronic device from her desk drawer, what appeared to be an encrypted communication device. Marcus watched as she connected the camera to this device and began uploading the images she had just captured. The upload process took several minutes, during which Lady Catherine kept checking her watch and glancing toward the door. As the upload completed, Lady Catherine disconnected the camera and returned both devices to what Marcus now realized was a hidden compartment in her desk. She had modified the furniture to create a secret storage space, invisible to casual inspection, but perfectly designed for concealing espionage equipment. The level of planning and premeditation involved was staggering. Marcus quietly retreated from his observation point, his mind racing as he tried to process what he had witnessed. In his 37 years of service, he had dealt with external threats, overzealous fans, and potential terrorists, but he had never encountered betrayal from within the inner circle of the royal household. The implications were enormous. Lady Catherine had access to virtually every aspect of the Queen's private and official life. She knew the family's personal schedules, their private concerns, their health information, and their most intimate conversations. If she was working for a foreign intelligence service, as her professional methods suggested, then she had potentially compromised decades of sensitive information. The damage to national security could be incalculable. Foreign governments might know Britain's negotiating positions before important diplomatic meetings. They might have advanced knowledge of the Queen's travel plans, making her vulnerable to attacks. They might even have access to personal information that could be used to blackmail or manipulate members of the royal family. Marcus returned to his office, his hands trembling slightly as he sat down at his desk. His first instinct was to immediately contact his superiors and report what he had witnessed, but years of experience had taught him to think carefully before taking action. Lady Catherine held an extremely powerful position within the royal household. She had direct access to the Queen and was trusted by the entire family. Any accusation against her would need to be supported by irrefutable evidence, or it would likely be dismissed as paranoia or jealousy from a lower-ranking staff member. Moreover, Marcus realized that if Lady Catherine was indeed a foreign agent, she probably wasn't working alone. Espionage operations of this sophistication typically involved multiple people and extensive support networks. There might be other compromised individuals within the royal household, people who could warn Lady Catherine if they suspected she was under suspicion. If Marcus moved too quickly or followed standard reporting procedures, he might alert the entire network and allow them to destroy evidence and escape. As Marcus sat in his office, surrounded by the familiar photographs and commendations that marked his long career of loyal service, he faced the most difficult decision of his life. He had always followed orders without question, always trusted the established chain of command, always believed that the system would protect the royal family from harm. But now he realized that the system itself might be compromised. The very people charged with protecting the crown might include those who sought to betray it. The weight of responsibility settled heavily on Marcus's shoulders. He possessed knowledge that could save the monarchy from a devastating security breach, but acting on that knowledge would require him to step outside the normal protocols and procedures that had guided his entire career. He would have to make decisions typically reserved for senior intelligence officials and government ministers. The loyal guard who had never questioned an order would now have to chart his own course through a maze of palace politics, national security concerns, and personal loyalties. Marcus looked at his watch and realized that in less than 2 hours, Lady Catherine would be attending the Queen's morning briefing, where she would have access to even more sensitive information. Every moment he delayed potentially allowed more secrets to be stolen, more damage to be done to British interests. The time for careful consideration was running out. He needed to act, but he needed to act smartly. The decision he made in the next few minutes would determine not only his own future, but potentially the fate of the monarchy itself. As Marcus reached for his secure telephone, he knew that once he made this call, there would be no going back. The loyal protector was about to become something he had never imagined he could be, a whistleblower whose warning would expose the most shocking betrayal in modern royal history. Marcus stared at the secure telephone on his desk for what felt like hours, though only minutes had passed since he had witnessed Lady Catherine's treasonous activities. His training told him to follow protocol and report the incident to his immediate supervisor, Commander Harrison, who oversaw the Royal Protection Service. But something deeper, an instinct honed by decades of protecting the royal family, warned him that the standard approach might not be sufficient for a threat of this magnitude. Instead of dialing Commander Harrison's number, Marcus found himself thinking about Deputy Chief Inspector Sarah Mitchell from the Metropolitan Police's Special Branch. Sarah had worked closely with the Royal Protection Service on several high-profile security operations over the years, and Marcus had developed a professional respect for her analytical mind and discretion. More importantly, Sarah operated outside the immediate palace hierarchy, which meant she would be less likely to be influenced by the complex web of relationships and loyalties that governed life within the royal household. Marcus picked up his personal mobile phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found Sarah's number. It was still early, barely 7 o'clock, but he knew that senior police officers were accustomed to receiving urgent calls at unusual hours. The phone rang 3 times before Sarah's crisp voice answered. "Mitchell here. Sarah, it's Marcus Wellington from the palace. I need to speak with you urgently about a security matter of the highest sensitivity." There was a brief pause, and Marcus could almost hear Sarah's mind switching into professional mode. "Can you be more specific about the nature of the threat, Marcus?" "Not over the phone. Can you meet me somewhere private? This concerns potential espionage within the royal household." The gravity in Marcus's voice must have been unmistakable, because Sarah immediately replied, "I can be at St. James's Park in 20 minutes. The bench near the bridge, the one we use during the state visit security briefings. I'll be there." Marcus ended the call and sat back in his chair, second-guessing his decision to bypass the normal chain of command. But as he replayed what he had witnessed in Lady Catherine's office, he became more convinced that extraordinary circumstances required extraordinary measures. The evidence he had observed suggested a sophisticated, long-term espionage operation that could have compromised years of sensitive information. Such an operation would require careful, professional investigation, not the kind of hasty internal inquiry that might result from following standard palace protocols. He gathered his coat and prepared to leave his office. But before departing, Marcus made one crucial decision. He retrieved a small digital camera from his desk drawer, the same type used by security personnel for documenting incidents and suspicious activities. If he was going to make serious accusations against Lady Catherine, he would need evidence beyond his own testimony. The camera was small enough to conceal easily, and its high-resolution capabilities would allow him to document Lady Catherine's activities if she continued her espionage work. The walk to St. James's Park took Marcus through the familiar streets surrounding Buckingham Palace, but today they seemed different somehow. Every face he passed could potentially belong to a foreign agent. Every tourist taking photographs might be conducting surveillance. Every delivery person could be part of an intelligence operation. For the first time in his career, Marcus felt truly paranoid, and he understood how dangerous knowledge could fundamentally change one's perception of the world. Sarah was already waiting on the designated bench when Marcus arrived, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her coat collar turned up against the morning chill. She rose to greet him with a brief handshake, her eyes already scanning their surroundings with the automatic vigilance of an experienced police officer. "Marcus, you look like you've seen a ghost. What's going on?" Marcus sat down beside her and took a deep breath before beginning his account of the morning's events. He spoke quietly but precisely, describing exactly what he had observed in Lady Catherine's office, the sophisticated nature of her equipment, and the highly classified nature of the documents she had been photographing. Sarah listened without interrupting, her expression growing increasingly serious as Marcus detailed the extent of what he had witnessed. When Marcus finished his account, Sarah remained silent for several moments, processing the implications of what she had heard. Finally, she turned to face him directly. "Marcus, you understand the gravity of what you're telling me? You're alleging that a senior member of the Queen's household is engaged in espionage activities. The evidence you're describing suggests a professional intelligence operation, not some amateur attempt to sell gossip to newspapers." "I understand completely. That's why I called you instead of going through normal palace channels. This requires the kind of investigation that only professionals like yourself can conduct." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "You're right to be cautious about internal palace reporting. If Lady Catherine is part of a larger network, there could be other compromised individuals who might warn her if suspicions were raised through normal channels. But we need to be very careful about how we proceed. Any investigation involving the royal household requires the highest level of authorization and the most delicate handling." Marcus felt a wave of relief that Sarah was taking his concerns seriously. He had been worried that his account might sound like the paranoid fantasies of an aging security guard, but Sarah's professional response confirmed that he had been right to trust his instincts. "What do you recommend as our next step?" Marcus asked. "We need evidence. Your testimony is important, but it's not enough to initiate a formal investigation against someone in Lady Catherine's position. We need photographic or video evidence of her activities. We need to identify the people she's communicating with, and we need to understand the full scope of the information that might have been compromised." Sarah paused and looked directly at Marcus. "This means you're going to have to go back and gather that evidence. You're the only person with the access and the credibility to document what Lady Catherine is doing without raising suspicion. Are you prepared for that level of involvement?" Marcus had been expecting this question, and he had already made his decision. "Yes, I've spent my entire career protecting the royal family, and I'm not going to stop now just because the threat comes from inside the palace instead of outside." "Good. But we need to be extremely careful about how we proceed. Lady Catherine must not suspect that she's under surveillance, and we can't risk alerting any potential accomplices she might have within the royal household. You'll need to maintain your normal routines while looking for opportunities to document her activities." Sarah reached into her coat pocket and retrieved a small device that looked like a standard mobile phone charger. This is a recording device with wireless transmission capabilities. It can capture both audio and video, and it will automatically upload anything it records to a secure server that only I can access. The device is small enough to conceal in your uniform pocket, and it's designed to look like standard electronic equipment that security personnel routinely carry. Marcus accepted the device, noting its weight and compact design. "How does it work?" Simple activation with this button, Sarah demonstrated, and it will record everything within a 15-foot radius for up to 4 hours on a single charge. The audio quality is excellent, and the video capability is sufficient for legal evidence. Most importantly, even if the device is discovered, there's nothing to connect it to our investigation or to you personally. The serial numbers and manufacturer information have been removed. As they concluded their meeting, Sarah emphasized the importance of patience and caution. Marcus, I know you want to act quickly to protect the royal family, but we need to build an airtight case before we move. Lady Catherine has been in her position for 15 years, which means she could have been conducting espionage activities for a significant portion of that time. The damage assessment alone could take months once we have evidence of her activities. Marcus returned to Buckingham Palace with the recording device concealed in his coat pocket, his mind focused on the challenge ahead. He would need to find opportunities to document Lady Catherine's activities without arousing suspicion, while continuing to perform his normal duties as if nothing had changed. The next few days would require all of his professional skills and personal courage. As he entered the palace through the staff entrance, Marcus noticed that Lady Catherine was already at her desk, apparently beginning her normal workday routine. She looked up and smiled pleasantly as he passed her office, the same warm expression she had worn for years during their brief professional interactions. The casual normalcy of her demeanor made the morning's discoveries even more disturbing. How long had she been deceiving everyone around her? How many secrets had she stolen while maintaining the facade of loyal service? Marcus returned to his office and began reviewing the day's security briefings, but his attention was divided between his official duties and his new role as an undercover investigator. He studied the palace's daily schedule, looking for opportunities when Lady Catherine might be alone in her office with access to sensitive materials. He also began paying closer attention to her interactions with other staff members, wondering if he might identify other individuals who could be part of her espionage network. The weight of his secret knowledge was enormous. As Marcus went about his normal duties throughout the day, escorting visitors, checking security arrangements, and coordinating with other protection officers, he was constantly aware that he possessed information that could fundamentally alter the royal household. Every conversation with colleagues felt strained. Every routine interaction carried the burden of his hidden agenda. By late afternoon, Marcus had identified what appeared to be another opportunity to observe Lady Catherine's activities. The Queen's evening briefing was scheduled for 5 o'clock, and the classified materials for that briefing would be delivered to Lady Catherine's office at 4:30 for her preliminary review. If her pattern of espionage continued, she might attempt to photograph these materials before the official briefing began. Marcus positioned himself in a location where he could monitor Lady Catherine's office without being observed, the recording device ready in his pocket. As 4:30 approached, he watched as a courier from the cabinet office delivered a sealed folder containing the evening's briefing materials. Lady Catherine signed for the delivery and closed her office door, a departure from her normal practice of keeping the door open during the day. The moment Marcus had been waiting for had arrived. Within the next hour, he would either gather the evidence needed to expose a major espionage operation, or he would discover that his morning observations had been an isolated incident. Either way, the loyal guard who had always followed orders was now operating in uncharted territory, where his decisions could determine the future of the monarchy he had sworn to protect. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the palace corridors as Marcus positioned himself in an alcove near Lady Catherine's office, the recording device activated and concealed in his breast pocket. His heart hammered against his ribs with an intensity he hadn't felt since his early days in the protection service, when every potential threat seemed magnified by inexperience and nervous energy. Now, decades later, he was experiencing that same heightened alertness, but this time the source of his anxiety was far more complex and dangerous than any external threat he had ever faced. Through the partially obscured glass panels of Lady Catherine's office door, Marcus could see her silhouette moving about the room. She appeared to be following the same pattern he had observed that morning, setting up her equipment, positioning documents under a lamp, and systematically photographing classified materials. The routine nature of her actions confirmed Marcus's worst fears. This was not an isolated incident, but part of an established espionage operation that had likely been ongoing for months or even years. As Marcus watched through the recording device's discreet lens, Lady Catherine worked with practiced efficiency. She had clearly developed a system for maximizing the amount of information she could capture while minimizing the time required for the operation. Each document was photographed from multiple angles to ensure clarity, and she seemed to prioritize materials based on their classification levels, focusing first on those marked with the highest security designations. What Marcus found most disturbing was Lady Catherine's apparent familiarity with the intelligence value of different types of documents. She wasn't simply photographing everything indiscriminately. Instead, she was making informed decisions about which materials would be most valuable to her handlers. This level of sophistication suggested that she had received professional training in espionage techniques and document evaluation. She was not an amateur opportunist, but a skilled intelligence operative who had successfully infiltrated one of the most sensitive positions in the British government. During his observation, Marcus documented Lady Catherine photographing briefing notes about ongoing diplomatic negotiations with several European allies, classified assessments of potential security threats to other members of the royal family, and detailed schedules for upcoming state visits that included information about security arrangements and travel plans. Each of these document categories represented a different type of potential damage to British interests if the information fell into the wrong hands. The diplomatic materials could allow foreign governments to anticipate British negotiating positions and develop counter-strategies that would disadvantage the United Kingdom in international discussions. The security assessments could enable hostile organizations to identify vulnerabilities in the protection of royal family members and plan targeted attacks. The state visit information could compromise the safety of both British royals and visiting foreign dignitaries by revealing detailed security protocols and travel arrangements. As Lady Catherine continued her work, Marcus noticed something that had escaped his attention during the morning observation. She was wearing what appeared to be a standard wristwatch, but upon closer examination through the recording device's zoom capability, he realized that it was actually a sophisticated communication device disguised as jewelry. The watch face occasionally displayed brief text messages, which Lady Catherine would read and then delete. She was receiving real-time instructions from her handlers, who were apparently monitoring her activities and providing guidance about which materials to prioritize. This revelation added another layer of complexity to the espionage operation. Lady Catherine wasn't working alone or following a predetermined list of target documents. She was part of an active intelligence network that could respond dynamically to changing priorities and emerging opportunities. Her handlers were sophisticated enough to maintain secure communications with an agent operating within Buckingham Palace itself, which suggested significant resources and professional capabilities. Marcus continued recording as Lady Catherine completed her document photography and began the process of transmitting the images to her handlers. The communication device she used was more advanced than what he had observed that morning, a compact tablet computer with what appeared to be military-grade encryption capabilities. The transmission process took nearly 15 minutes, during which Lady Catherine periodically checked her watch for messages and made adjustments to the transmission parameters. While documenting these activities, Marcus also noticed details about Lady Catherine's operational security procedures that revealed the extent of her training. She had positioned a small mirror on her desk that allowed her to monitor the corridor outside her office while she worked. She had modified her office lighting to eliminate shadows that might be visible from outside. She had even placed a small device near her office door that Marcus recognized as an acoustic sensor, designed to detect approaching footsteps and provide early warning of potential interruptions. These sophisticated security measures confirmed that Lady Catherine was operating as a professional intelligence agent, not an amateur stealing documents for personal gain. Her level of training and equipment suggested that she was working for a major foreign intelligence service with significant resources and expertise. The implications for British national security were staggering. As the transmission completed, Marcus watched Lady Catherine begin the careful process of returning all documents to their original positions and preparing her office to appear normal for the upcoming royal briefing. She worked with methodical precision, ensuring that every paper was exactly where it had been when she received the materials from the Cabinet Office courier. Her attention to detail was remarkable. She even used a small brush to remove any fingerprints from surfaces she had touched during her espionage activities. Marcus realized that he had now documented enough evidence to prove Lady Catherine's guilt beyond any reasonable doubt. The recordings showed her systematically photographing classified government documents, transmitting the images to unknown recipients, and taking sophisticated steps to conceal her activities. Any court or intelligence tribunal would find the evidence overwhelming. However, as Marcus prepared to conclude his surveillance and report his findings to Sarah Mitchell, he witnessed something that changed everything he thought he understood about the situation. Lady Catherine opened a hidden compartment in her desk that Marcus hadn't noticed before, and from it she withdrew a thick folder marked with official government seals. As she opened the folder, Marcus could see that it contained what appeared to be personnel files for various members of the royal household staff, including detailed background investigations, security clearances, and personal information about their families and financial situations. Lady Catherine began photographing these personnel files with the same systematic approach she had used for the diplomatic and security documents. But the implications of this particular theft were far more personal and immediate than the other materials Marcus had observed her stealing. These files contained information that could be used to blackmail, manipulate, or threaten members of the royal household staff. They included details about staff members' financial difficulties, family problems, health issues, and other personal vulnerabilities that could be exploited by hostile intelligence services. As Marcus watched Lady Catherine photograph page after page of personal information about his colleagues and friends, he felt a surge of anger that surprised him with its intensity. This wasn't just about protecting national security or diplomatic interests. It was about protecting the people he worked with every day, people who had dedicated their lives to serving the crown and who trusted that their personal information would be kept confidential by those in positions of authority. Among the files that Lady Catherine photographed, Marcus recognized folders for several people he knew personally, including Thomas Hartwell, the elderly gentleman who had served as a palace footman for over 40 years and was planning to retire next year to care for his wife, who suffered from dementia. Lady Catherine was photographing details about Thomas's financial struggles to pay for his wife's medical care, information that could be used to pressure him into compromising his loyalty to the royal family. She also photographed the file of Maria Santos, a young housekeeper who had been working at the palace for only 2 years but who had quickly earned the respect and affection of the royal family for her dedication and discretion. Maria's file contained information about her immigration status and her family members still living in Spain, details that could be used to threaten her or her relatives if she refused to cooperate with foreign intelligence operatives. As Marcus continued recording, he watched Lady Catherine photograph files for dozens of royal household staff members, each containing personal information that could be weaponized by hostile forces. The scope of the potential damage was enormous. Foreign intelligence services could use this information to build a network of compromised individuals within the palace, creating multiple sources of information and multiple avenues for influencing royal family decisions. The personnel file theft also explained how Lady Catherine had been able to operate undetected for so long. By stealing information about the backgrounds and vulnerabilities of her colleagues, she could identify potential threats to her operation and take steps to neutralize them. She might have been using the personal information to blackmail other staff members into silence or cooperation, creating a web of compromised individuals who were too frightened or too vulnerable to report her activities. When Lady Catherine finally completed her photography of the personnel files and began returning them to their hiding place, Marcus realized that he had stumbled upon an espionage operation far more extensive and dangerous than he had initially imagined. This wasn't just about stealing diplomatic secrets or security plans. It was about infiltrating and corrupting the entire royal household staff structure. As Marcus concluded his surveillance and prepared to leave his observation post, he understood that his warning to the authorities would need to encompass not only Lady Catherine's espionage activities, but also the potential compromise of numerous other staff members who might have been blackmailed or coerced into cooperation. The investigation that would follow his report would need to examine the loyalty and reliability of virtually every person with access to sensitive royal information. The loyal guard who had started the day believing he was protecting the royal family from external threats had discovered that the greatest danger came from within. Lady Catherine's betrayal represented not just a single act of espionage, but a systematic corruption of the trust and loyalty that formed the foundation of royal household operations. The evidence Marcus had gathered would expose the most significant security breach in modern royal history, but it would also shatter the sense of family and mutual trust that had made the royal household function effectively for generations. As Marcus made his way back to his office, the weight of his discoveries pressed heavily on his shoulders. In his pocket, the recording device contained evidence that would change everything. But he also knew that revealing the truth would destroy the careers and reputations of innocent people who had been manipulated or threatened into compromising their duties. The warning he was about to deliver would save the monarchy, but it would also expose the painful reality that loyalty and trust could be corrupted by those with the skill and determination to exploit human vulnerabilities. Marcus returned to his office with trembling hands, the recording device in his pocket feeling heavier than any weapon he had ever carried. The evidence he had gathered was overwhelming, but the complexity of what he had uncovered made him realize that his simple plan to report Lady Catherine's activities had become something far more complicated. He wasn't just exposing a single traitor. He was potentially unraveling a sophisticated intelligence operation that might involve multiple members of the royal household staff. Before contacting Sarah Mitchell, Marcus decided he needed to review the recorded evidence to ensure he understood exactly what he had documented. He connected the recording device to his secure computer and began examining the high-definition video and crystal-clear audio that had captured every detail of Lady Catherine's espionage activities. Watching the footage confirmed his worst fears about the scope and sophistication of the operation. The recordings showed Lady Catherine using equipment that was clearly beyond anything an amateur could obtain. The communication devices, the camera equipment, the encryption technology, and even the modified furniture in her office represented an investment of significant resources by a professional intelligence organization. This level of support suggested that Lady Catherine was working for a major foreign power with substantial intelligence capabilities and long-term strategic interests in Britain. More disturbing were the details about the personnel files she had photographed. Marcus could clearly see the names and contents of the files, and he recognized that they represented a virtual roadmap for compromising the royal household staff. The information included not only personal vulnerabilities but also detailed assessments of each staff member's access to sensitive information, their positions in the palace hierarchy, and their relationships with members of the royal family. As Marcus studied the recordings, he began to understand the true sophistication of the operation Lady Catherine was conducting. She wasn't simply stealing information randomly. She was building a comprehensive intelligence picture of the royal household that would allow her handlers to manipulate and control virtually every aspect of royal family life. The stolen diplomatic and security documents provided strategic intelligence about British government operations, while the personnel files provided the tools necessary to create a network of compromised individuals who could provide ongoing access to royal family activities. Marcus realized that his discovery had come at a critical moment. If Lady Catherine's operation had continued undetected for much longer, foreign intelligence services might have achieved unprecedented access to the most private aspects of royal family life. They could have influenced royal family decisions, manipulated diplomatic communications, and potentially even threatened the safety of individual royal family members. The urgency of the situation prompted Marcus to contact Sarah Mitchell immediately, despite the late hour. When she answered her phone, Marcus could hear the background noise of what sounded like a busy restaurant or social gathering. "Sarah, it's Marcus. I have the evidence we discussed, and the situation is far worse than either of us imagined. Can you give me details?" "Not over the phone. We need to meet immediately, and you're going to need to involve your highest-level contacts. This isn't just about Lady Catherine. It's about a systematic compromise of royal household security that could involve multiple staff members." Sarah's voice became immediately more serious. "I can be at our previous meeting location in 30 minutes. Bring everything you have." Marcus gathered his materials and prepared to leave the palace. But, as he was about to depart, he encountered something that made his blood run cold. Thomas Hartwell, the elderly footman whose file he had seen Lady Catherine photographing, was standing in the corridor near Lady Catherine's office, clearly distressed and engaged in what appeared to be an intense but quiet